Good morning, folks. Let's try that again. Good morning. Thank you. My name is Kathy Snead. I'm the Director of Service Members Opportunity Colleges, and what I'm going to do today is introduce the presidential panel. A couple of them have asked that question about why so early in the morning. And the secret or the answer to that is that last year and in past years, this panel has been the most highly regarded workshop general session. And so we wanted to make sure that we start with a bang. And also, that's our way of getting you all here. What I'd like to do first is introduce the moderator, and then she will then introduce the rest of the panel. Dr. Muriel Howard is the 4th president of ASCU. That's the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. And she's been with ASCU since April of 2009. As the ASCU president, Dr. Howard is an advocate for public higher education at the national level, working to influence federal policy and regulations on behalf of member colleges and universities. She's well suited to moderate this panel, as she has been the president for 13 years herself at the university, at Buffalo State College, which is one of the SUNY colleges. She was the president there for 13 years. So she's experienced firsthand the challenges, the responsibilities, the tireless travel schedules that they all endure, as well as the rewards of being the chief executive officer at a college or university. Her professional and scholarly interests include educational leadership, women and minorities in the academy, and a long-standing personal commitment to public service. She serves on a number of advisory boards, including Air University, the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance, and the National Survey of Student Engagement. Many of you know that as NSSE, NSSE. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce my boss to you, Dr. Muriel Howard.
Thank you, Kathy, for that generous introduction. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning. Since it is a little wet outside, we really appreciate everyone being here. What I'm going to do this morning is introduce our panel, and then we will also go into a number of questions, but I will make sure that I leave some time so that we can hear your questions and observations this morning. Just a little bit about our panel this morning. We're going to today feature 4 distinguished college leaders from across the higher education sectors. Their remarks this morning will focus on the complexities of voluntary education as they relate to economic factors that impact the student cost of college attendance, how institutions are working to contain tuition costs and administrative fees, particularly as they relate to our military student population. They'll also offer their perspective on the administration's new proposal for a post-institutional rating system, kind of known as peers. So we will have them address those questions. So let me begin introducing our panelists. Our first president on our panel this morning is Dr. Wallace Boston. He is the president and chief executive officer of American Public University System. American Public University System recently completed its 10-year re-accreditation process with North Central's HLC under Dr. Boston's oversight. Dr. Thomas Klincar, if you'll just raise your hands so they can see you are, is the Chancellor of Central Texas College. Dr. Klincar had a distinguished military career of 28 years, retiring from the Air Force as a full colonel. He served as the enlisted professional military education CEO, and he also oversaw the community college of the Air Force. To my far left and your right is Dr. George Pruitt, who has been at the helm of Thomas Edison University for 32 years. He has served as a national advisor to several presidents and secretaries of education, and currently he serves as the vice chairman for the National Commission on Higher Education Attainment. And George, I read in the paper on my way down here that you've also taken on the chairmanship for the Middle States Association. So congratulations. Our last panelist, but not least, is Dr. Elane Seebo, who, due to weather conditions and flight cancellations, is serving in place for Wayland Baptist University's president, Dr. Paul Arms. Dr. Arms was not able to get in, but Elane is here, and she is the Vice President of Extended Campuses and Graduate Studies. She previously served in the Air Force and was the Chief Academic Officer for the Air Force, Chief Academic Officer for the Community College of the Air Force before joining Wayland University. So Elane, welcome, and thank you so much for helping us out today. So panelists, let's start with our first question, and I'm going to ask Dr. Klincar to take the lead on this question, and then all of our panelists will have an opportunity to respond. One of the higher education priorities that President Obama vowed to focus on during his second term of office was keeping the cost of college attendance from rising so that access to quality education was attainable for all college-capable citizens. What viable strategies can college universities leaders employ to contain college costs without sacrificing the quality of their educational services to students? Could you?
I have a big mouth, maybe not big enough. Test. It's working. So, thank you, Muriel. As far as affordability for attending college, in this group, we're really talking about two issues. We're talking affordability and out-of-pocket costs to the student, and we're talking about affordability for those who pay the tuition. And both are important, both are distinctly different. I'd like to talk about affordability to the student first. We need to get the cost of attending college manageable for these students. The cost of textbooks is one of the primary issues that affects every student that attends my institution. And I'm very pleased to see that there's going to be a roundtable discussion on this very issue tomorrow. Now, what I'm going to say next may not make about half of you happy. We need to move the issue forward. We need to embrace new technologies. We need to be innovative again. Now, when the Department of Defense eliminated textbook reimbursement from the Tuition Assistance Program, there were nimble, energized colleges that found a way to still deliver such learning materials to the students. And I admire them for that. American Military University, part of the American Public University System's one of them. Now that's being clamped down on. Today, my college is entering into a pilot with the Blackboard Learning Management System, Missouri Book Systems, our textbook distributors, same textbook distributors for many of you. In fact, the representatives may be in this room right now. We're going to embrace e-texts. And I'm afraid it may be too late. Certainly, the proprietary schools, some of them, are already doing this. We're going to, within the same learning management system, we're going to try to work with the publishers to get the cost of these textbooks down by at least 50%. And those of you who are in here that are advising students that are working these issues, you know that there's a lot more complexity to simply slashing the costs by 50%. We're also going to be working with Rice University and their OpenStack system. But we're not very comfortable with new technologies. It takes a commitment from those of you who advise the students, for the students themselves, mid-management, and all of us who sit up here to say we can do this, we can drive costs down. Second, and this applies to all colleges, the federal government needs to put some teeth back into the eligibility of student loans and financial aid programs. Our tuition in district is $68 per credit hour with no across-the-board fees. And yet we still have students who find themselves tens of thousands of dollars in debt from student loans. That is wrong. Federal government has eased up the attainment of these loans, thus the affordability in the long term has gone way up. There's no penalty for non-payment, but the schools are held accountable. Higher government's underfunded, yet we see more and more unfunded mandates levied upon our colleges. And make no mistake, the Department of Defense Memorandum of Understanding is an unfunded mandate. Now, I like it, I like what it's doing, but every time we add on more of an administrative burden to colleges, the costs go up, and those costs get passed to students. And finally, and I'll pass this to the next person, let's all embrace community colleges. We're a two-year school, and our costs are typically lower. Let's let community colleges provide the first 2 years of that degree program. With these, the schools up here, we have complete articulation agreements that seamlessly feed into a baccalaureate program. Let's build on each other's strengths and not work against each other. That will help make college affordable for all. So, back to you.
Just would each panelist, if you'd like to make some observations on that question?
Sure. I agree with Tom on a number of fronts here. It really is a travesty that institutions don't have the ability to refuse to allow students to borrow many more times the amount in loans than the tuition of those institutions, particularly when we work hard to keep the costs down. Congressman, so for institutions that want to support what Tom and I want to support, that's great. I think the textbook initiatives, Tom, that you all are talking about are great. We've been working with the Creative Commons folks and the OER folks for open resources, and I mean, it just, another great example. It seems like a travesty that there are probably several hundred English 101 textbooks, or several hundred Calculus 101 textbooks, and we can't get somebody to come up with one, contribute it to the Creative Commons, and then we all use it, and it doesn't cost anything to the student. Right. I think that it does take discipline, and when Clayton Christensen's Innovative Universities books came out, a lot of us in traditional academia were a little skeptical of everything that he talked about, but I thought from a business perspective, he had a good viewpoint where if traditional institutions with a residential component can operate their campuses at a break-even basis and then bring in online programs to get incremental students, but he was very careful to say to do that at a marginal cost, not to try to do it at the same cost, actually get creative and think about it. And if you look at Southern New Hampshire University, which I know there are people here from Southern New Hampshire, and I'm a good friend with Paul, Paul LeBlanc, who's done a good job with creating some innovative things, particularly as we look at competency-based education, where some of us aren't going to necessarily like it, but competency-based education doesn't put professors in the classroom. It puts professors as advisors and tutors through that. So there are some innovative things out there. We can't ignore them. We have to look at them. But in many cases, used correctly, including partnering with two-year schools like Tom's, we can save the students money.
Well, I would certainly echo most of what's been said, particularly the fact that we need to remain open to new models as we look at ways to facilitate transfer of credit, to accept credit in ways that when people already have the knowledge and the skills that we need. I think in doing that, it's important not to lose sight of some of the very basics that allow us the cost containment, and that is to make sure that we're reviewing our programs periodically, making sure that our curriculum is keeping pace with what's going on in the field, and then taking a look at our transfer policies and all of those kinds of things that help us facilitate the completion of degrees into our institution, and then the transfer to other institutions. That entails for us enhancing the partnerships and the articulation agreements both into and out of the university. I think one of the things for an institution like Wayland, that is a small institution, is that it's important for us to match our facilities to the actual needs, and that means we don't have a lot of bells and whistles in some ways. We lease facilities some places, we buy facilities some places, but it allows us to be a little more flexible in responding to student needs as those change. And part of that is true with technology as well. We have to make sure that we've got technology that is available to help us contain costs in many ways, a lot of it administrative, some of it instructional. But you have technology because it is useful in helping you contain costs, not because it's technology for technology's sake. So if you are introducing students in your face-to-face classes to technology, we know there's a lot of online instruction that takes place with our military population. The learning curve for that technology for many of our students is not really high, but familiarizing them in all the different venues with the technology helps to facilitate that piece of it. And the other thing that we would advocate is what you've heard once before, and that is a reduction or at least a stabilization of the federal and state requirements that are levied on institutions that require increases in personnel. Our Institutional Research and Effectiveness Department has tripled in the last 5 years to try to keep pace with the different reporting requirements. And part of that has to do with the fact that you have a lot of people collecting data that is very similar, but just different enough that it requires a slightly different twist. So the same systems, the same software will not handle the same kinds of requirements, and there are certainly a need for us to stabilize those in that area. And in terms of containing costs, not just in terms of what colleges can do, but we talk about talking to our congressman about different kinds of things, but the current Black-Davis student family tax simplification bill that's on the table that would reduce the tax credit for our college students ultimately does not enhance our ability to make sure that they have the capability to go on and do work beyond their undergraduate degree. And we certainly would advocate that you take up legislation.
Dr. Pruitt, are there any strategies that you would add to what our panelists have presented so far?
Yes, it's a complex, it's an easy question, but the answers are complicated. There are some strategies that institutions are doing. It's sometimes frustrating, and I know you share this, because when you go up on the Hill, people don't know what's going on in the community. I'm talking about New Jersey because I know it best. But there's a thing called the New Jersey President's Council, which is made up of all of the college presidents in the state. We meet monthly. And we have done a lot of things through voluntary interinstitutional cooperation that have lowered cost. We came together and created a very robust technology platform to support research and student services. We organized it, we funded it, we share it. We join in purchasing so that our telecommunications costs are lowered because we bring the purchasing power of 56 colleges and universities to the table. We are among the public institutions. I think, as many of you know, Thomas Edison is a pioneer in prior learning assessment. We are creating a statewide testing and assessment center where Thomas Edison is doing prior learning assessment for the students at other public institutions, where they won't have to try to create the infrastructure to do that for, frankly, a relatively small number of students. We are getting together to try to share faculties in providing foreign language. Foreign language programs are very low enrollment programs, and so their costs are very high. But we looked at the data, and if we aggregate our students that want majors in these areas and aggregate the faculty, where a faculty member from Montclair would teach one course in French and a faculty member from Rowan would teach another course in French, we can in fact put together majors that none of us could afford to do as individual institutions. Those kinds of efforts I know are going on all over the country. Among our private institutions, the issues of cost are much more complicated. The public doesn't understand our pricing. When we flew in here today, or yesterday, or whenever you flew in here, every seat on that plane was occupied by someone that paid a different fare. They all showed up at the same time, they got on the same plane, they got off at the same time, and they all paid different fares depending on when they bought the tickets and what restrictions that they were willing to put up with. Private colleges and universities, it's hard to figure out what the tuition is because of all of the various discount plans, and so the public doesn't understand the pricing structure, and the cost drivers are very complicated. But back to the public sector, I think we have to try to do a better job of having informed consumers in the choices they make. I agree with some of the things coming out of Washington and the various states that useful information for an informed consumer is a good thing. I totally disagree with pretty much every way they've gone about it. I think they've come up with the wrong answers, but I think the question is reasonable because the consumers have a lot to do with it as well. There are houses that I can't afford, there are cars that I can't afford, and there are colleges and universities that I can't afford. That doesn't mean that there aren't high-quality options available to me and to my children that I can't afford. But I have to get away from this mindless passion that we have that education equals prestige, and prestige is defined by the cost. And our consumers are in that loop, and we have to try to unhook that. And the final comment I'd make back to the public sector, Muriel has mentioned I've been doing this a long time. I'm still optimistic about it, but my cynicism is pretty high. And I will tell you that politicians attack what they can't fund to avoid accountability for the consequences of the cuts. If you look at public higher education over the last 15 years, we've had the largest disinvestment in the history of our country. Now, if you're a public institution, your principal source of income is public support and tuition. I'll give you a little case study about what happened to us in New Jersey under our previous administration. The governor negotiated a contract with our labor unions that called for, over the life of the contract, it was a 4-year contract, a 34% increase in salary over the 4 years of that contract. At the same time, we had a 20% decrease in our appropriation. Now, if you increase our fixed costs by 34% over 4 years, if you cut our appropriation, who do you think has to pick up that tab? It drives up tuition. And so to then demagogue public institutions about raising responded to this issue and acknowledged it. And several years ago, and we've all seemed to have forgotten, as has the Congress and as has the President, they passed a law requiring states to maintain a level of effort to be eligible for states to receive federal aid, because the Congress saw states cutting state support and they saw that it was driving up tuition. And so they put in this maintenance of effort. It was passed. It has to this day never been enforced, and every state that's violated it has been wavered. The recent laudable efforts by states and the federal government to make sure that our veterans pay in-state tuition, and in New Jersey there's a bill in this week to waive application fees. Thomas Edison was engaged and committed to the military a long, long time ago, since we've opened our doors. And nothing will take away that commitment. But I must tell you that these well-intentioned initiatives are unfunded mandates, and they punish students like institutions like ours. So the institutions that get hurt the most are the institutions that have made commitments to serve our veterans and our military. I've been out with a very simple principle. If it's a mandate worth giving, it's a mandate worth funding. So the institution in New Jersey that will be hurt the most by these mandates is the institution that is most military friendly because we have the largest military enrollment in the state of New Jersey. So these are complicated questions, and they can't be responded to with soundbite answers. And we've got to try to figure out a way to engage our political leadership that have the megaphone. And we have to get engaged locally with our members of Congress. We have to get engaged locally with our editorial boards of our newspapers to try to add some texture to these questions, because they are not, if you ask, and I'm going to say this again when we get to talking about this stupid rating system.
Well, George, why don't you, that was going to be my next question. So,
you will never
so
get,
this is a good time for us to move to,
well,
what
you
do
will
you
never
think
get to
about
the right
new
answer.
system?
I'm sorry. You'll never get to the right answer by asking the wrong question. Thank you.
No, George. Actually, I was going to ask you to lead off on that next issue that, you know, in November, the president did announce that he was unveiling a concept for a new rating system that would judge colleges on their affordability, outcomes, access, et cetera. And, you know, we know that proposal is meeting with mixed reviews across higher education, and certainly in Washington, D.C. The department is still in the process of gathering feedback on this concept, but, you know, what is your observation about the new post-secondary rating system that is being proposed? And then, if you could just tell us, if this rating system is to go forward, which I should tell all of you, it is going forward, what would you include or not include? I mean, what advice would you give the administration about this concept?
A friend gave me a gift. That's a placard that I have framed in my office, and it says, "There is no point in doing well that which should not be done at all." The rating system that's as currently conceptualized is based on a false premise. And that premise is that public higher education is homogeneous and that you can use the same metrics and variables across institutions that are different in mission and different in constituencies that they serve. It is one thing to talk about consumer information on which to make an informed judgment. That is a good thing. But to put together a rating system that suggests that institutions should be rated in terms of their quality and in terms of their eligibility for financial aid on issues, many of which they have no control over at all. Public institutions, for example, have very little control over their cost. So it's okay to rate the states, but don't rate the institutions because they don't control their cost. The notion about this craziness about vocationalizing higher education, that the purpose of going to college is to get a job, just is wrong-headed. It is true that high-capacity people earn more than low-capacity people. That is true. It is also true that higher education is the engine that builds capacity in people. But the notion that the purpose of going to higher education is to prepare you for a job is just wrong-headed. I saw some data actually last week, that said that only 27% of the people in the country in the workforce are engaged in fields directly related to their undergraduate major. Mm-hmm. To suggest that an 18-year-old is capable of making a decision about what they're going to do for the rest of their life is idiotic. Most people change majors 3 and 4 times during the life of their career. Most of the people in this room, I was an undergraduate major in biology and I'm minored in chemistry, and I haven't been in a laboratory in 40 years. The other thing, the metrics about evaluating a college or university based on the income of a student 5 years out, and I know in Washington there's a timidity about criticizing the administration. I want to tell you, I want this president to be successful. I'm a person of reasonably average intelligence, but I have looked forward and I have done some pretty dumb things in my life. Doesn't mean I'm a dumb person, but occasionally I make mistakes. I want this president to be successful, but his notions about rankings are wrong, and we have an obligation to stand up and say that they are wrong. Yes, they're going to do it anyway, but we should not legitimize it by saying it's okay and working with them to fix something that shouldn't be done in the first place. The issue about trades tying your income 5 years out of college, you know, if you look at the president, and listen, I'm a black guy from Chicago. I'm waiting for this guy to be president all my life. So I want this president to be successful. But if you look at the president, he was a transfer student. According to iPads, he's a college dropout. When he graduated from Harvard, finished law school, he married well, and so he was able to work as a community organizer. If you looked at the president's salary 5 years after he finished school, it wouldn't be doing so well. So according to his policy, he's a college dropout that went to a lousy school because he wasn't making any money 5 years after he finished school. If you use that metric, in New Jersey, if you looked at the school that would be #1 in the state of New Jersey on income 5 years after college, it wouldn't be Princeton and it wouldn't be Rutgers. It would be Thomas Edison State College. Because my students are mid-career working adults. And 5 years out of Princeton, you're not making what my students are making. And so if you would look at the data and say you ought to go to Thomas Edison because you'll be making more money than you'd make if you went to Rutgers or Princeton, I just, you know, that's a very specious point of view. So I worry about also the federal government shouldn't be in the business of ranking higher education and colleges and universities. Consumer information, yes. Protecting the billions of dollars in financial aid and federal investment, accountability for that, absolutely yes. But no, I do understand that they're going to do it, but no, we shouldn't try to help them fix it. We need to point out why it's wrong. We need to oppose it, because the fundamental assumptions that underlie it will hurt this country. If we create a regiment and a protocol that creates an incentive system to select really smart 18-year-olds and ignore everybody else, when that's about 40% of the college population, it's not just bad policy or an inconvenient federal regulation. It will destroy American higher education, and that's why it needs to be opposed, not because it's a nuisance or nonsensical federal law. And I hope my colleague presidents, you know, Muriel, you said the reaction has been mixed. I haven't talked to anybody that saluted this damn thing. Thank you.
Let me be a bit more succinct than George has been. You know, every one of us believes that we can identify what's wrong with what the other guy's doing. Fortunately, we're not in that kind of position. Unfortunately, Congress is. And because of that, we see folks who have not done what you've done, who have not moved up through higher education and experienced all of these difficulties at creating success for these young people, not so young people, who come in through our doors. That's a problem. And we have a rating system. It's a beautiful rating system. It's called regional accreditation. And when we dismiss and when we attack those organizations that are external to the government, we open ourselves to government control that will destroy what is the envy of the world for higher education. Now, just as regional accreditation is considered more prized, and the reason for that, there's many reasons, but they look at the district, and they look at that part of the country, and they can best address the needs of that part of the country. National accreditation is not quite, does not have quite the reputation. So how is it that a federal rating system can take care of the folks in Trenton, New Jersey, or Killeen, Texas? It cannot. Now, we benefit, just as Thomas Edison's graduates benefits. We benefit because, by and large, by about 80%, our students tend to continue to wear the uniform. And they tend to be mid-career folks. And mid-career folks, when compared to an associate degree earner in rural America, they're going to make a lot more money straight out of college than will that person that has to start on the bottom rung of a career. This cannot work, should not be implemented, and federal government needs to preserve what is best in higher education and regional accreditation.
And I guess being from a, I'm sorry.
Talk into the mic, yeah.
I'm sorry?
Hold the mic closer.
Okay. I guess being from a faith-based school, I should probably just say amen to most of this, and I do. But the only other point, and I think it's been made, but I just emphasize the point that inherent in any kind of rating system is accountability. And inherent in accountability is the construct that you must have some kind of control over what's being rated. And as has been so eloquently pointed out, there are many of the proposed elements of the rating system over which institutions of higher learning have absolutely no control. And even if it were not morally and ethically repugnant, we would be ill-advised to try to steer all of our students into those highest-paying career fields where we would end up with no artists, no writers, none of those things that make up the kind of the backbone of our culture. So even if we had control over some of those elements that are included in the rating system, it probably is not the right thing to do. If it is absolutely inevitable that we have a rating system, which I am hearing that it probably is, then I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we have all of these elements considered. With the wide diversity of American educational populations, you can't have a single set of metrics that will let us compare, rate different kinds of institutions for different kinds of students.
Well, I'm still getting over George's comments. I don't disagree with any of the other panelists here. It perplexes me that, well, it actually doesn't surprise me. For any of you who've ever been to Washington and visited a congressional office, usually you don't get to see the congressman or the senator, you see their staff. And when you really delve into where the staff comes from, as in what college they graduated from an elite school. I had the good fortune to go visit Senator Harkin's staff a few years ago. And, you know, one of the individuals there talked about low graduation rates. And I said, well, do you understand graduation rates and high-risk students and swirling students? And he goes, no, I just know that your graduation rate's too low. And I said, where'd you go to school? And he said, Dartmouth. And I said, okay. I said, I went to a school like that. Our graduation rate was 95%. And, but it's sort of like, you know, garbage in, garbage out, good inputs, good outputs. When you are so selective that you only accept the top 2 or 3% of the high school graduates in the country, you're going to get a very good outcome. And when you're less selective, you've got people that life gets in the way and it interferes with them. But the staffers on the Hill and the staffers in the White House know nothing about the rest of the U.S. college population. And as George said, you're going to eliminate 40%, and you absolutely are going to eliminate access to a lot of people if a rating system comes in here developed by people who have no understanding other than having attended elite colleges. There's a lot of, when you get into the academic literature, my personal research area of interest is in student retention and open access. And when you get into the literature, there are multiple different classifications for students. And when your institution is open access and particularly has a large online population, the diversity of the students and the classification groupings are so complex that to try to figure out a formula or to put them in a category and say that one institution should go in this bucket is absolutely ridiculous. I'm opposed to the classification system. At the end of the day, if you want to improve graduation rates, the only surefire method that our institutions, everyone represented in the room and all across America have ever found is to increase selectivity. When you increase selectivity, you're going to deny access, and I disagree with even going there.
Thank you. And I should tell you that this is still a very open issue in Washington, and actually the congressional leaders have not really weighed in on this issue at all, except Senator Harkin has kind of raised his concern about it. So there's still plenty of opportunity for you and your college and universities to weigh in on this issue and respond during this comment period. So I know George would tell you not to sit on your hands, but to participate, as would all of our panelists. You know, we did say that, okay, accountability is fine, and in many cases we're willing to look at that. So I'd like to ask you to comment on program accountability for student success, because as we look at it across higher education, the need for consistent and relevant definitions and measures of student progression and student outcomes is being called for more and more. So tell us about how your college or university measures learning outcomes or successful programs and degree completion. And if you have anything that's targeted, especially for military students and veterans, we'd like to hear about that as well. Sure, you can just lead right off.
Sure, I'm glad to start on that because your institution, which sponsors SOC, there was a SOC white paper that a group of institutions worked on several years ago that was presented at DoD Worldwide in Las Vegas. And as someone who looks at student retention, student persistence, I think it was the best collaborative effort in higher education to explain the attendance pattern of working adult students that I have seen. I cite that paper frequently in writings, and essentially for those of you who haven't seen that SOC paper, 16 institutions, some of them colleges and universities, others organizations representing higher ed, had representatives to formulate this white paper. And so first of all, it looked at identifying intent. And identifying intent is very difficult because all of us know that if you want tuition assistance, for example, to reimburse your tuition, you have to state that you're degree seeking. But swirling students may attend 5 or 6 institutions, and they may want to attend a class at my institution but want to earn a degree at Tom's institution. And so they're going to say that they're degree seeking. Well, part of this white paper was the institutions involved said we have to figure out a way to look at what the real denominator is. And so the first thing was we're not going to count in our denominator anyone who attends less than and earns credit for less than 3 courses or 9 credit hours. We're also not going to count anyone in our denominator who transfers in less than 9 credit hours. Because this is a group that transfers a lot of credit, either from military training that's been evaluated by ACE and most of us accept, or from other places, attending a course here or there while they're on a base, on assignment. And if you read through that white paper, I really think the group did a very good job at looking at the current literature in attendance patterns, as well as some of the habits of the students that attended their institutions and really represented themselves well. So when I look at those particular issues, I start off with that SOC working group paper, and I think it's a good self-reflection for many of us that represent adult-serving institutions.
Okay, Dr. Seebo?
The only thing I would add to that is to say that I think in terms of student progression and making sure that student outcomes are met, clearly you have your course outcomes and your program outcomes, but the key to it is looking at each student and looking at their progression and what their individual situations are. As was just pointed out, you have students who have some particular characteristics in our military populations. And I think the difference in ensuring that student outcomes and student progression are met are taking into account those things that are more problematic for that population than some of the rest of your student population. Not how you measure student outcomes, not having different student outcomes, but paying attention to those things that are different for that population in terms of what you need to do to make sure that you identify your academic concerns early on, and that requires that you have a process where you have metrics in place, where you have ways of assessing what levels of student outcome and progression you have at any given time, regardless of how much credit students transfer in, how much they're going to transfer out, or whether they're a transient at your institution taking a course to go to another location. So kind of the Mother Teresa mentality that says you start with the one nearest to you and you work student by student with that individual attention, and I think that's probably the key for us.
Well, much as Elane and Wally have just talked about, there is no one-size-fits-all, and for a student or the learning outcomes. Now, we know the metrics. We look at course completions, certificate degree completions inside a specified period of time, or we look back to student satisfaction. We look to whether they received a job in that field of study. It's complicated even further when you talk about the military populations that all of us serve. We know that a military member occasionally has to pick up and fight our nation's wars. Life happens. So we focused on successful programs, and you specifically asked about the military, in several ways. And I don't think they're that different from what you're doing. I like to think back to Community College of the Air Force. I've even heard in this room at another time that it's not a real college. It's a cutting-edge college because it's conferring college credit for experience, experiential learning. Now, we have other colleges that have been pioneers in that. Excelsior, the old Regents, certainly has been a leader in this regard, and I like to believe that the college that I'm relatively new to has pioneered the student success by maximizing the evaluation of their experience to reduce the time to degree completion. Now, it's evidenced today by our College Credit for Heroes program. The College Credit for Heroes program is a Texas initiative that's been recognized by the White House that does just that. It takes the book that we wrote so long ago and applies it statewide. We need more cooperation along these lines. Service members, Opportunity College for the articulations, the ACE Guide is moved us even further along to helping military students, but we've got to continue to go further. You know, on our central campus with the vocational programs, we offer a flex entry. That is, and they're self-paced programs. If a student is a wage earner and works in a factory during the day or second shift, when they're off, they can come in, except for the midnight hours, but we're working on that, to study their vocational field. We have instructors available, lab techs available to help them with their learning outcomes. Being flexible in that manner helps students achieve their goals. Our articulation agreements with all of you and through Service Members Opportunity College help students to completion, especially when we work closely enough together to fully recognize and accept as transfer credit all of those college courses that students have already taken. We've got to get past the arrogance of saying that because one lesson in a 16-week program of study does not exactly mirror my college, are the learning outcomes the same? And until we do that, we're going to penalize students. We don't want to do that. I don't believe anyone in this room wants to do that, but it happens. Let's all of us continue to band together with articulation agreements that help all of our students and the other support services, the Vet Success Program that Kurt Coy was talking about on campus, the Yellow Ribbon Program, student veterans organizations. All of these help our military students get to completion. We've all got to be committed to it, and we need to take care of helping one another. Thank you.
Thank you. I think accountability and attention to it is critical. I think from my earlier comments, I think I share with all of you the value of the great diversity of institutions we have, the richness of them, and the high quality of them. But aside from the external calls for accountability, which I think are at least motivated by reasonable concerns, we need to ask ourselves the question, how do we know that we are good stewards of our mission? And that's a question that we need to confront every day, and we need to challenge ourselves to be able to answer that question. And I don't know how you answer that question without objective, thoughtful assessment of what your enterprise is like, to be able to answer at the end of the day, yes, we are a good steward of our mission because we have evidence that tells us, that gives us feedback, that lets us know that we are satisfying the purpose for which we were created. Thomas Edison has an advantage. It has a very unique, focused mission, and it grew out of an assessment and metrics culture, and we measure everything. The critics say is that those of us that object to the public calls for accountability, that we just don't want to be accountable, that we don't want to be accountable for the resources, that we whine a lot, that our basic position is give us money and leave us alone. There is some truth to that. I think we need to know and be able to answer the question, are we good stewards of what we measure? We measure everything. We know why students come to us. We know why they leave us. Every way that you get a credit from Thomas Edison at the end of the day is backed up by some objective assessment of a learning outcome. The only area where I can't say that is the transfer credit we take from the rest of you. We take your word for it. We don't measure graduation rates. Why? Because there is no expected normative pattern of progress. Now, if you're dealing with an 18-year-old that goes to school and is expected to graduate in 4 years, fidelity to that is retention, and that's good. If deviation from that is attrition, that's bad. But our students come in and out. Our students take work at other schools. You mentioned Excelsior. Excelsior and Thomas Edison essentially started out as credit aggregators. And I have a friend of mine who's married to a football coach. And football coaches move around. He coached at Indiana, Illinois, Central Michigan, Morgan State, Dartmouth, and Brown. Those pretty good schools. She took courses at every school that free as a spousal benefit, but she wasn't there long enough to graduate from any of them. She came to Thomas Edison with 163 undergraduate credits. When we finished the evaluation, she graduated. She was with us for 30 days. So how do you figure the retention and graduation rate on her? Did she graduate in 30 days, or did she graduate in 17 years? But we don't want to take ourselves off the hook, so we do want to know when a student leaves, why do they leave? And we want to know whether they left because they didn't understand us, they didn't do a good job with us, because we want to be accountable, because at the end of the day, it's important that the people at Thomas Edison State College go to bed at night knowing that we are good stewards of the mission of that institution, and that we know that because we've got good, objective data and metrics that tell us that. And it also, systems put in place that if we slip, that if we become complacent, that if we become routine and let inertia take over, which happens at all of our institutions. I mean, part of our jobs as presidents is to protect our students from our own bureaucracies, because it is the innate law of bureaucracies that over time they will serve themselves as opposed to the people they were created to serve. So I do challenge all of us to take the accountability issue seriously. And the other benefit of it is that when you go on the Hill and when you go into your legislators and when you go to your funders and they say about this stuff, you say, no, that's wrong, but this is right. And you won't be able to say that unless you've been very thoughtful of that. Now, I know I'm not naive. It's very threatening to our faculties. But I have seen faculties be successfully engaged around that because faculties, at the end of the day, were called to the same noble purpose that we were. And when challenged with that question, how do you know that you're good? And how do you know that we are good? And how do we come together to be able to demonstrate that? You'd be amazed at the cooperation you can get sometimes.
Well, did you have any other observations? Okay. I'm going to ask our panelists to respond to one last question, and then we will open it up to the audience so we can hear your questions and concerns. And Dr. Seebo, I want you to answer this question too, even though it was designed for our presidents, which is basically what keeps you guys up at night regarding military and veteran students enrolled at your institution. And then, is there any single best action that could be taken to help allay your concerns for military and veteran students? So, Dr. Klincar, do you want to leave off on that? What's kind of keeping you up at night?
The continuous downsizing of the military and the constant changing of tuition assistance policies. It's been an absolute roller coaster for our students and your students. Now, what we did to level the field, and I believe some of the other institutions did this last April, we let our students continue on. We simply, we didn't go after your students, but we simply waived tuition. That was a $5 million commitment for that 8-week period. We can't keep doing that in order to provide a level field and equal opportunities for those military members. When we see downsizing in Europe, such as it is, when we completely pull out all education services from Afghanistan, such as we've done, and that deprives military members of their chance to continue their degree programs. And you all know what happens once you stop. Trying to get started again is ever so difficult. Now, we have a DoD Memorandum of Understanding on higher education. Why can we not standardize tuition assistance policies across the military services? And I can't pass this microphone until I talk about this issue of state licensure and the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. When you have the Department of Education declaring that it is unenforceable, so it will not be enforced. But then it gets handed over to the Department of Defense, and they decide that it's the law of the land, and so it must be enforced. And then the differences in gaining that licensure from state to state. You all come to Texas, we welcome everybody and we don't charge you, but some of your states do. And trying to navigate through, again, unfunded mandates that require so much time and documentation, they amount to additional accreditation visits. It is time for us to cooperate, and let's petition our legislators to do that in the name of our students and especially those who wear the uniform. Thank you.
I guess if you ask what keeps us up at night worrying about the military members that are at our institution, I'll be a little bit more bureaucratic and say it's trying to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to make sure that we can keep serving those students in the best way possible. And a lot of it has to do with things like the state authorization the licensures that you're required to have in the various and sundry states. And we only operate physical campuses in 6 states. We have one on one other continent as well, which kind of throws another wrinkle into the bag for us. But trying to make sure that we are, in fact, in compliance with everything that we need to be in compliance with, so that we are not denied the opportunity to be able to continue to serve the military population that we've been serving for the last 4 decades. So what kinds of things does that mean, and what could you do to improve that? I think it's already been touched upon, but the key to it is the information flow. We have a military population where you have things happen that are rather unexpected, like the suspension of TA and those kinds of issues that are not necessarily easy to communicate. But the only thing that's going to make that better for us is to increase that whole construct of working as partners. And that is a true partnership, not a one-sided partnership where the information flow has to be both ways. If we know what kinds of adjustments as institutions that we need to make, and we have even minimal time to respond to those, then we can better serve the military population that comes to us.
I would say ditto to Tom's comments, both about consistent TA and state regulation. I think that I go back to this White House initiative. I really don't respect a system that's designed by people who think they're geniuses and they've never worked in a field like higher ed. And it worries me that they think they're going to come up with a system that puts everybody into the right buckets. So I lose a little sleep over that. But I go back to, I was sharing with Tom earlier that I met with one of our students last night who is assigned in the local area, and he's a Central Texas graduate. So our agreement with each other transferred all of his credits from a block credit perspective. But with these cutbacks to the tuition assistance program, he really wants to earn his bachelor's degree in 2 years. And so he has applied for Pell Grants to pick up the difference in his tuition. And he is focused, he's a great student, and told me about his situation that after he puts his kids to bed, he starts working about 9:30 at night. And here's an individual who's already earned an associate's degree, that's working full-time, that's raising a family, that is trying to earn his bachelor's degree, and who knows, given his drive, he may succeed and earn a master's and maybe even go on to a doctorate, whatever his personal educational goals are. But we don't seem to have people, either who are elected officials or who are working in departments of education, who understand that type of student, which is now the majority. You know, we talk about traditional and non-traditional students. Non-traditional students, we should flip the categorization, because 75% of all of our higher ed students are what was formerly called non-traditional. And it really, of all the things that keep me up at night, it's the fact that all of our elected, the majority, vast majority of our elected legislators are traditional and really don't understand this.
Yeah, just ditto. It's the external compliance environment at every level. States are doing it. The federal government is off the hook. I've been doing this a long time, I've never seen a federal government like this one in terms of its regulatory inclinations and the wrong-headedness of it, but at a lot of different levels. But also at the states, the accrediting associations. I'm incoming chair of Middle States, and I guess I should have had a disclaimer that my comments should not be interpreted to reflect the position of the Middle States Association. But they know my views on these things, and they elected me anyway, so I think we're okay with that. But I will say something about accreditation. People in the accrediting community know that we have challenges there too. We tend to get involved in the weeds and hassle and get involved with minutia and worry good institutions. And all of us have institutions that are frankly weak, that we have tolerated for too long. although that's very complicated as well. Middle States is undergoing a soup-to-nuts revision of its standards right now, and it's not to update them. It's to try to reconceptualize what accreditation is about and focus on the big issues like quality and how we serve and educate our students. But it is the external environment, the compliance environment is putting the best system of higher education in the world at risk, and it is a self-inflicted wound.
Okay, now we'd like to take some time to respond to any issues or questions that you might have for our panelists. I think there are going to be microphones or a microphone made available.
Hello.
Good morning. I appreciate all of your comments. I share many of your sentiments. My name is Deshandra Johnson. I'm representing Michigan Veteran Affairs Agency. I have a question with regard to tracking veteran students on campus. Outside of those students, military and veteran, that are receiving funding that you can track their attendance through the funds they receive and the certifier reports. What are some of the more innovative ways that you have been tracking students on campuses and identifying those who are not on any kind of federal or military assistance?
Anyone?
One of the things that gets done, one of the practices in a college is, it's very good, and I don't think any of us is going to reinvent it, is trying to help track students that need assistance. We all use the FAFSA, the free application for federal aid. And as far as assistance at my college, on my campus, we dissuade students from taking out those loans because we tell them to look to the future. At $68 per credit hour, and the fact that most of our students either have tuition assistance, which will pay for their tuition, they have, and we identify all of these for them, so I guess that's how we do it. And then we have tuition assistance, there's the GI Bill, there are Workforce Investment Act funds for the needy students, and there's the Hazelwood Act in the state of Texas, whereby a Texas veteran pays no tuition. So what we do is we advise them, and do not go out and take out those heavy loans, the heavy debt, and work within it. We work with organizations across the city. We provide affordable housing that's subsidized. That's the key, is not to find more aid, but use the aid that's available and control yourself. You don't need that newer car. You don't need that iPad necessarily, and that's so very difficult to do. I really want us to get away from the feeling of entitlements and I need it now. So that's what we do at our college. We counsel as we track.
Anyone? I'll just add, we're totally online, so as far as tracking people on campus, it's a different story, but we do have an electronic student union, and we have a chapter of the Student Veterans of America, which I've been told is the largest in terms of enrollment. And then we have organizations that veterans can form, or any student can form. I think the last time I looked at it, there were about 1,200 student organizations in our electronic student union. But particularly, you know, some of the things that aren't necessarily unique to us. I think other institutions that are online have done this. Back in 2005, at the Sloan Consortium meeting, a group of our faculty got together and created a discussion group on how to recognize PTSD symptoms in an online classroom. And that group has met irregularly since 2005. But back then, there wasn't the acceptance, so we established a chaplaincy position because you didn't have to inform someone that you had sought counseling, since a chaplain's not technically a social, a psychologist or a social worker. And we still kept that chaplain position, even though now it's much more acceptable to report your PTSD symptoms. So there are ways to work with students even online and to meet their needs. And I also agree with Tom's point that discouraging people who have a program that more than reimburses them for attending lower cost institutions from actually participating in the federal student aid system, which unfortunately they have access to, but loans have to be repaid, or you have to go into some type of forbearance situation later in life.
We have another question.
Hi, good morning. Mike Carroll from Ohio State. I talk to a lot of military members that feel disadvantaged to their peers through no fault of their own, and we do a lot of things to help them, such as the Joint Service Transcript, SOC, ACE, state requirements. And we're going to have a panel with all those service chiefs up here next on education. There's going to be one glaring admission. It's the Air Force Community College. Do you think it would be possible, or even more important, do you think it would be worthwhile to pursue legislation that would require the military to develop a accredited Department of Defense community college, or alternatively require them to develop 5 service-specific accredited community colleges?
That's one of my favorite topics. So with my colleagues, we do have the Joint Services Transcript, but that transcript is not from an accredited college, and our various institutions must evaluate that credit once again. We have the ACE guide. Whether or not we find a community college of the armed forces, or we have the will to do that in our midst, it won't happen. I look back to the days, the late 60s, early 70s, when we were considering starting community college of the Air Force. Not me, maybe George, but but looking back on that experience, what had happened was pretty much our higher education community said, oh, the Air Force wants to start a community college, isn't that cute? And they thought at most it would be something like that little school in the hills of Colorado Springs that we operate, maybe 4,000 students. Never in their wildest imagination did they think that community college would evolve to encompass every enlisted reservist, guards, air guard, or active duty Air Force member, with an enrollment that exceeds by quite a bit, 300,000 students, and confers nearly 18,000 associate degrees each year. Will there ever be a community college of the armed forces? What you see, what you believe, depends upon where you... Not on my watch. We won't let it happen. Our lobbyists won't let it happen. And while it's exactly the right thing to do to take care of our military members, there will not be the political will in Washington to create such an institution. Anyone else?
I'll make one comment. I know there has periodically been...
The former dean of Community College of the Air Force.
There's periodically been legislation that has gone forward, and in fact, as late as last year, I believe there was a bill on the table to relook the construct of a community college of the armed forces. My only comment would be that if it's ever going to happen, this is probably the environment in which it can happen, because as you may know, Community College of the Air Force is accredited by the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges. They are at this point in time looking at their first competency-based programs that they are accrediting. And since that's kind of the backbone of what CCAF is, there is at least a chink where they might be able to look at it. Will it happen? I don't know, but I do believe it would be the right thing to do if we could make it happen.
It's going to be a big challenge. Any other questions?
Good morning, Bart Bickner with Fielding Graduate University. And I think all of you have mentioned the issue of post-traditional students, or the percentage of students in higher education that are not of the traditional mindset, which of course would include most military students. The question I have for you is, have you addressed within your institutions what happens with the faculty in terms of their ability to work with post-traditional students, which is much different than most institutions have been doing, and is also something that probably sets off PTSD among student veterans more than maybe any other factor in higher education?
I'll start with that one. In our particular case, when you start an institution that's totally online, you're not traditional in starting, and many of your early adopter faculty members are very comfortable teaching in a non-traditional format because they're innovators and early adopters. I also look at many of our faculty, and they earn their doctoral degrees as non-traditional students. So they were working and had a lifelong learning interest to go beyond just earning a master's degree, and so whether it was a really new option like earning a doctorate at Capella totally online, or at a not so new option, but going through a program at a school like Northeastern, you know, a number of them had gone through a route that's very similar to their non-traditional student, and so they relate. Our 2,000 faculty, approximately 400 to 500 of them are veterans as well, so you know, they recognize that much of their education was paid for during their career in the military or afterwards using the GI Bill. So we really, I guess because everyone recognized that this wasn't going to be the traditional route for teaching, we've got some very good proponents of the non-traditional route, and our faculty turnover is about 4% a year, so it's pretty good.
I think we've been working with our military population and non-traditional students, adult learners, since the early 70s in a very concentrated fashion. We've always had full-time faculty at our external campuses and at our residential campus as well, who have worked together and worked in faculty forums that were the same. And I think probably the biggest boost to melding the andragogy and the pedagogy that goes along with working with those different populations came with the advent of our online programs in the late 1990s. Probably by 2002 or 3, almost all of our faculty had worked in various capacities with all the different populations. And there, in every academic council, every graduate council we have, there's generally someone who will point to the advantages of having that blended population for both of the different populations. So it really, I don't think it's been an issue for us for many, many years.
We are likewise blessed having a history such as our institutions have. The faculty that we attract tend to be very supportive of our military communities, if not having been a part of them. Most of our deployed instructors are either going to be idealistic recent college graduates, or more likely a retired military member who's also a contractor at this time. They understand the demands on our military members. On our central campus, we, being right outside the gate of Fort Hood, Texas, we've been, again, indeed fortunate, blessed, that for 5 years running, we've been identified as the safest campus in Texas. I believe that that's because of the care and respect. We have an older student population that is exhibited across our student community. We have support organizations, much like as Wally was describing. I'm sure we all have those. We have therapists on the college staff that can intervene. We have early identification by the faculty members for troubled students, and we have free tutoring programs that are one-on-one. We make a real commitment to caring for those students with unique demands. And every once in a while, when someplace in the world we have someone who needed to deploy or came back late and didn't get a course, there's always the big stick of President Yiannopoulos, and he usually gets it fixed before it ever gets to me. So,
a couple of quick things. One is that there is enormous diversity in the adult student, post-traditional student body, and it's something that we have to get our heads around. 18-year-olds are a very diverse group, but for simply developmental reasons, they have more in common than they are different. When you talk about adult population, you're talking about people from 25 to 95. It's an extraordinarily diverse student body. We have a huge adult literacy problem in this country. So you first have to start out with about what kind of student are we talking about. That's why the notion of having diverse institutions that gives choices to have a good fit and alignment is so critical. Adult students are disruptors at some institutions. If you, in fact, respectfully referring to my age and longevity, if you look at the public adult serving institutions that got started in this country, Thomas Edison, Empire, Excelsior, Minnesota Metropolitan, they were all started between 1970 and 1973. Now, University of Maryland, University College was founded in 1946 to serve military, and they kind of morphed into that role. But those institutions were formed, the rationale for those institutions came from a series of Carnegie Commission reports back in the 60s, where I was around, that said that adult students were disruptors. And it advised higher education to create policy contexts specifically tailored for adults, that adults were not 18-year-olds that had just been around longer, and that you could not adequately and properly serve adult institutions within a policy context that was created for 18-year-olds. And so their recommendations were that higher education needed to create institutions specifically focused on adults, or to create specific policy contexts within existing institutions for adults. That's why the challenge of fit and mission is so important. There are institutions that adult students should not go to. They will not be served well, they will not feel comfortable, they will not be treated well. There are institutions that veterans should not go to. That doesn't make these institutions bad institutions. It means that they have particular mission and foci that suggest that this might not be a good fit. The good news is there's an extraordinary rich diversity of institutions where there is a pretty much good fit from anyone. We're an adult serving institution. If you look at community colleges are adult serving institutions. The average age of community college students, the last I looked, was around 27, 26, 27. At Thomas Edison, we get very few community college students, even though we're the most transfer-friendly school you'll ever find. But the average age of our student body, if you exclude our active duty military, is about 40. So it's a totally different kind of adult student, and most community college students want a different experience than our experience. So again, it's difficult to talk about what the answer is. Is it this particular application for this particular client for this particular purpose? If you get that alignment right, you'll get a successful outcome. If you don't get that alignment right, it'll be difficult.
I see that our time is up, so let's give our panelists a round of applause. I think they've been very candid and has given us some really great information today. Thank you. I want to thank each of you for your participation.
We have a couple of announcements and updates, and we're certainly going to get a photo opportunity of our panel down here. As before, they don't disappoint. This is probably one of the more energetic panels that we've had. Joycelyn, are you ready for an update?
Hi, I wanted to let you know that, as you know, the job fair is today. They are going to be directing the job seekers directly back to their area. They're here to speak to employers about employment. After they do their business in the back, they have been told to please visit the exhibit hall and walk around and visit the booths. But we'd really like to ask that we as exhibitors not wander back into that area and interrupt those conversations that are going on. So I appreciate that, and it's time for break.